I don't know. Yeah. All right, so we left off talking about radial engine cam, not a camshaft, but a ring, which I showed you on the radial engine across the street the other day. So it has two tracks. One for intake and one for exhaust. You would have one cam ring per row of cylinders. And we'll put this. Cam speed is not 1/2 the crankshaft speed. It's actually 1 over number of lobes times 2. Not that you have to remember that. It's just kind of a way of saying, hey, it's not like a camshaft. And the reason why is because you can make it as big or as small as you want to, or have room for, and then depending on how many lobes you have, then they'll just reduce that or speed it up, whatever you have to do to work with the crankshaft that you have. All right. The lobe, everybody knows what the lobe is, right? So on a shaft, we look at it kind of on side. The lobe is the part that goes up like that. So that's the lobe. The lobe, or ramp, and regardless of which style it is designed to minimize opening and closing shock. All right, so as much as we talked about cylinders getting corroded, and which they do, it's not very common that you hear somebody, engine had to be overhauled or disassembled or something done because of my cylinder corrosion. Most people just tend to live with corrosion in their cylinders. It kind of goes away if you run it enough, I guess. You get some corrosion built up. The airplane's been sitting for years and years. Start it up and run it, and the rings scrape across it and kind of knock most of it away. And then you're left with some pitting in there, and that pitting can cause high oil consumption because the oil gets in those pits, and then when the piston goes the other way, the oil then is burnt, and then it goes this way, and the oil gets in. So the rings aren't cleaning it up. So then you get high oil consumption, and then at that point somebody says, well, my oil consumption's too high, and they look and they go, well, cylinders are pitted, and then there they go. But camshafts really tend to be one of the main factors in overhaul. It seems like, it's just an observation, not a statistical thing that I know. And Lycomings get it worse because in a Lycoming, the camshaft sits on the very top. Continental sits down the bottom. And inside of the crankcase, you get condensation, and condensation tends to want to sort of rise up, and so you get the water source tends to want to go to the camshaft up top. So once it starts corroding on a camshaft or lifters, well, you just have a metal rubbing against metal, and then that starts making metal, and then pretty soon the cam lobes start wearing, and then you get pits, really bad pits. I've seen some tappets, just completely destroyed, like, whoa, look at that. So, like I said, Lycomings get it worse, number one, because they're on the top of the engine. And number two, until pretty recently, I'm not even sure if you can, they did not use any sort of roller tappet. They used the tappets like you guys have. And how do you get those tappets out? What's that? Yeah, it's real easy. You just take the whole engine apart, right? Okay. Big bore Continentals, the tappets don't have a mushroom head like that. They're just one piece. They're the same size. And so you just pull the push rods off, which you can do on those engines. You can't on, how do you get the push rods out of your your engine, take the cylinders off. You know, it's like there's only a couple engines left to do that. It's the 290, I think the 235, and then all the rest of them they come out without having to pull the cylinders, which is nice. And then in the Continental, only the small 0300s down. All the rest of them, they're just held in with springs. You can pull them out. And so in Continentals, you can actually take out, if you start to get a little bit of pitting on your lifters, you can actually take them out, throw them away, put in brand new ones. It's not that big of a deal. But anyway, so yeah, it's that's kind of a bad thing. And so, you know, we're so worried about it that well, I worry about it in my own airplane because still, you know, I've got a big bore Continental. How do I can change lifters, but I can't change camshaft. And a lot of people run stuff like cam guard and oil additive, which I started using. We'll see how that works. It's really expensive. But anyway, I have causes of cam failure. Causes of cam failure. Number one, and probably this is what I would say in the order of importance, is an inactive engine. Well, what is inactive? If you look at service bulletins, they talk about engine preservation. You know, for an inactive engine, it's, I believe most of them are about 30 days. So if you don't fly it every 30 days, you're expected to do an engine preservative. I've done engine preservative. I hate doing it with a passion for a lot of reasons. Number one, you change out the oil and you put in a different kind of oil, and then you do a ground run. I haven't done it in a long time. And then you take that oil and you put it in a spray bottle and like you spray it up in the carburetor while it's running. That's why I hate doing it. And then you set it and then you're supposed to spray it in the cylinders and then not move the engine at all. And so, yeah, it's kind of weird. Anyway, but yeah.
What's the word after closing on number 6? Closing shock.
Yeah.
How come you put it in the cylinder, but you don't actually like rotate the?
Well, because once you rotate it, then you start wiping it.
Okay.
Yeah, then you wipe it off. So inactive engine. All right, I'll mention it here. So it was for a lot of years, and and many people still do it. They think, okay, well, inactive engine is bad. So what are you going to do?
Run it.
It's in the middle of winter. We should run it. Well, that's the worst thing you can do. So on the ground, like they say, I'm just going to go on the airport. I'm just going to start it up, let it run for a little bit, and I'll shut it down. You have to get the engine oil up to inside of the engine to over 212, so you boil off the water. So if you don't run your engine, you're not going to. So all you do is you warm up the engine, and so the air in the engine and the parts get warm, and that expands the air in the crankcase, which that expanding air goes out the breather. Then you shut down the engine, and the air contracts, and then you suck in more wet. So then you start it up, warm air, cool, more wet. And you just suck. All you do is suck it in the wet. And so you're better off just don't run it. All right. Well,
So you can't just run it until it gets up to 212, or is that?
you can't do that on the ground.
You can't.
They're air-cooled cylinders, and so you have to run it at a pretty high power setting. Then your cylinders are going to get too hot because they're not getting airflow through the cowling. So it's the whole thing's a mess. Just fly it. That's why you bought it. High RPM starts. Now, funny thing about this. Now, I think I got this from Lycoming or somewhere or something I just know. Well, no, I got it from a source, but yet it was recently, and I was working at a shop, and we went out and ran an engine, and I do what I always do. I start the engine up, and I idle it at the lowest setting that will allow it to idle smoothly. That's 800-900 RPM usually. And the guy with me goes, "Man, you gotta increase it. It's still cold." He goes, "Oh no. We like to warm them up about 1200 or something." Oh, well, I said that's too high. He goes, "Well, we got a piece of paper from a engine that was just overhauled, and they said for cam protection, always run it at a high RPM at start." Okay. You're the one calling the shots, but I still say high RPM starts. It's not good for them. Cold starts without preheat. Cold starts without preheat. And of course, we're talking about really cold. And I looked.
Alaska cold.
Yeah, what's that?
Alaska cold.
No, well, yeah, definitely Alaska cold. It's not be that bad. I don't remember. I looked it up when I was doing my cross country because I left the airplane out in some pretty cold environments, and I was in that zone. I was getting really close to it. It was definitely a cold soak, but thankfully my airplane, I landed and then it was still hot, and then I came in the morning and it hadn't been sitting for months on end like that. Valve action, or that'd be the valve train. Misadjustment. We talk about that. A lot of people don't adjust valves or take the care in looking at valves. I hear it all the time. That could be either too tight, or too loose. Obviously, sticking valves. You got valves that are sticking closed, and that cam's trying to force it open, and it's not going open. Well, I would think that would hurt it. And overspeed. All right, let's talk about some specific parts. All right, we're going to be looking mostly here at a opposed engine. That is what a modern Lycoming crankshaft looks like. The gear is on there. Why is it copper colored? Carburized to be. Yeah, it's not carburized. Carburized is the term. So, like as I was saying, for all the years I was in the business, it's funny is this is what Lycoming tappets look like. Well, now they're starting to look like this. But you know what? Go way back, like World War II-ish, when they started making radial engines. Guess what they had? Roller tappets. So we started with roller tappets, and then the flat people are like, no, we don't want that. We just want this stuff. So it's metal on metal and rolling. It's like, well, sure, that works. Okay. So the valve train is made up, obviously, of the camshaft, then the tappet body is really the appropriate thing to call it, the tappet body. The tappet inside of the tappet body for almost all engines is the hydraulic unit assembly over here. You don't have it. You have one of the very few engines, opposed engines, that actually have solid lifters. Most of them don't. They're hydraulic lifters. And then you have the push rod, which goes to the rocker arm. There you go. Oh, look at me. So there's a Continental. Notice that is the intake because they're much wider. What do we got then? Those are the hydraulic lifters. Anybody spot the difference? What's different between this set and this set? That black gap right there is bigger. Yeah, they call these high flow lifters. And there was some service bulletins where they came out with these. They wanted them changed to high flow. Why is that? I don't know if I'm going to talk about it now or later. I'll talk about it now. Okay, so high flow lifters are going to bleed down faster. Thus the term high flow. And so we talk about how these things work. And so it will flow more oil up the push rod, out of the rocker arm and down. So that created more oil up at the top end. It also means they bled down a little bit faster. So I'm not 100% sure if they wanted the valve to close faster, which I don't think they did. I think they wanted more oil to get up there in the top end and lubricate that exhaust valve. So why not do that on the intake side? Well, like Continental seemed to have a little bit of a problem with their intakes sucking oil, thus the need to modify them and put intake guide seals on it. So I think they wanted to keep the intakes as not a high flow, and they wanted the exhaust as a high flow. That's my take on the situation. Next picture. Click. Oh, yeah, there's different types. Had the straight body, the spherical, notice the spherical, the hyperbolic, the fat boy, and now the hydraulic roller tappet.
Do you see the hyperbolic a lot? Looks like it wouldn't work.
It's not. They're not obvious like that. When you pick it up and look at it, you have to measure it. Yeah, it's not that obvious.
That's good. good patches.
There. Good tappets. Good ones. That has a little bit of spalling. If you turn off the light real quick. There you can see the spalling. Okay, those look great. These little dots right here, hardness test. Checking for hardness. Done at the factory. So you should be, see, they've been spinning, and that's good. Let me see if I got some bad ones here. No. No bad ones. Roller tappets, annulus. Okay. Go back here. Now I know what I got pictures for. Okay, lights back on. Moving, talk about causes. Okay, you got the overspeed. And now we'll talk about the B, which would be the lifter. Or some people would call it the follower. Follower. And that is the thing that rides against the camshaft or cam lobe. Against the cam lobe. I'll go back one here. This is the lobe, the whole thing that sticks up, but the part leading up to the tip of the lobe, we call that the ramp. So you have the whole thing, I call the whole thing the lobe, and it's the ramp, that's the part that leads up, and then the tip, then the ramp. There we go, right against the cam lobe. There are two types. There are, how can we do this? Well, I have it this way, two types. Two types. Really, I showed you a bunch of them, but this way, I have the roller. The roller, very typical in radial engines. Never seen a radial engine without roller tappets. And how did I write being used? Yeah, being, and also, well, I don't need to write being. We'll just put used. Used in opposed engines in limited quantity. It's like new technology. Becoming more common. It does use a different cam with a flatter lobe. Uses a different cam, flatter lobe. So you can't just pull out your regular tappets and throw in rollers. You got to do a
And that's
different cam.
specifically for the opposed engines or just for
Yeah.
the roller? Okay.
Well, it does not apply to radials because radials have roller cams. All right, so what do I got? 1, 2. This is B. This is 1. Right. Oh, 1, 2 types. 1, so number 2. Oops.
B.
Yeah, I kind of changed things here, so just trying not to screw you up, but I probably will now. What number am I on?
Well, that would be
B.
B for the two types.
Okay.
A was the one type and B is the second type.
Well, whatever. I got a point here, so we'll make it 2 because there's a 1 here. Make that a 2. Talk more about the tappet, even though I went backwards. Let me do that. Yeah.
What's the second type?
The roller and oh, that's what it is. 2 types. Sorry. I'll make that a B. That makes no sense. And B. Yeah, thank you. And we'll just call it solid. Solid / hydraulic. Tappet body. Tappet body. There we go. All right. So it could be solid, could be hydraulic. Either which way. No. And I'll tell you why in a little bit. All right, so they are typical. So you're saying, your engine has solid, could we just decide that we want to put in hydraulics? No, because you need a pressure oil system. You don't have a pressure oil system. You have a trough oil system. Typical in opposed.
Could you add that hydraulic
Nope.
oil?
alteration.
The case is not made for it.
Yeah.
No, you have to have pressure oil feeding into the tappet body. I mean, literal pressure oil from the oil pump has to go down a gallery with it drilled to fill that with high pressure oil from the oil. You don't. Your cases, if you didn't notice, it actually has a little cup like that where splash oil gets into the cup and there's a little hole that drips down in. Okay, typical and opposed engines. Let me see. There are the different styles. And I showed you those on that service instruction 1011 that had the hyperbolic, the straight, the tap. The cam, and tappet are ground to cause rotation, are ground to cause rotation. To minimize wear. So during an engine repair, like if I were doing a prop strike, which I did a lot of, I would pull out the cam and I would make damn sure all of the tappets were clearly marked, because those tappets have taken a run and they have to go back where they came from. So tappets got to go back, or if you mix them up, well, now you got to get new ones, or you got to have them taken care of. So on a prop strike where I didn't have to do that, it would just be set aside. I'd also give the customer the option, hey, look, we're doing a prop strike on your engine. Honestly, this prop strikes for customers are almost one of the greatest things. Hate to admit it, but oftentimes they would have an engine that was getting really close to TBO or had a lot of time on it. They would hit the props. The insurance company would pay for a prop strike, and then you just come to them, well, look, insurance companies paid for 90% of your overhaul. You just buy these parts, and we can call it an overhaul and do this. And they're like, yeah, do it. So I'd always give them the, hey, we're at this point. Do you want to, new cam lifters, put these back in? You're paying for it. Your insurance company's not going to cover it. On an overhaul, you can't just take them out and look at them, put them back in. You got to do something with it. And that just becomes sort of experience what you want to do and a cost. So Lycoming, because they're so prone to having their problems with the corrosion, and Lycoming cam and tappets are not very expensive, I would usually buy new cam and lifters for the Lycomings. But I always give the customer the option, hey, this is what a new cam and lifters are going to cost. This is what reground. So it's really, really common to send cam and lifters out and have them reground. But the thing is, you always have to think about it. Never, ever send your cam to this guy to get reground and your lifters to that person to get reground. Because when they fail, they do that. Hey, cam failed. Yeah, because his lifters failed. Hey, he says your lifters failed. No, it's because his cam failed. And you got nothing. And everybody. So if you take your cam and your lifters, you send it to that guy. That guy does both of them. If there's a problem, you go back to that guy. And, well, who did the lifters? You did. So that didn't really happen very often. But all it has to do is happen once for you to go, okay, that's how you do things. Continentals, I don't think anybody was regrinding the big bore tappets, and they were reasonably expensive. So reasonable, yeah. The expense was reasonable, so replace those and maybe a reground cam. Just depend on the price and what it was. But things you got to think about. Once installed, and run. Cam and followers are a matched set. Cam and followers are a matched set. Although, like I said, with the big bore Continentals, if they start to get a little bit of pitting, you can swap out the lifter bodies, pull them out, change out the lifters, and hopefully save something. So that means positions must be maintained. What happens if you mess up?
That's not good.
Well, let's just say you pull them out, and you just kind of, or maybe somebody else is taking the engine apart, and they take them all out, and they just put them all in the little, muffin tin for you, and bump the muffin tin, a couple fall out.
Can you measure like inside diameter, whether it should go to kind of?
There's a match set. Now, what I said, once installed and run, the cam and followers are a match set. So that lifter body has to be on that low. So what do you do?
Buy new ones.
There you go, just buy new ones. Or you have to have them reground. I mean, honestly, you know, I'm sure there are people who mix them up all the time, put them back together, and probably is okay. You know, probably. That's, you get to make that choice, I guess. Normal wear pattern. Wear pattern is circles. Circles. I'm not gonna write this one. Cam is grounded at an angle to promote tappet rotation, which I kind of already wrote before. As tappet wears, it leaves circular rings, like tree rings. All right, so I'm going back out here. This is point 2. May be solid or hydraulic. May be solid or hydraulic. So let's talk about hydraulic. Hydraulic system. Hydraulic unit. Sometimes called a zero lash. Zero lash system. All right. So on the solid units, which you have, you don't have the hydraulic unit in there, so they are in fact solid. So what happens is you have to set it up, and as you know, there's an adjustment out here on the rocker arm. And so you are going to be adjusting them to an exact gap, and you're going to gap it so that, and it's very exact. It's, I forget, what is it, 10 thousandths? Something like that. So you're going to get it within a very narrow range, and it's a very small amount. Which is kind of funny to me and a little bit that it's as big as it is, because as the cylinder heats up, is it going to expand or shrink?
Expand.
Okay, so the cylinder expands, which means that the rocker arm is closer or further away to the camshaft. Further. So if you had a little tiny gap, is that gap going to get bigger or smaller? Bigger. So whatever gap you're getting, it's going to get bigger. That's why these engines are kind of clangy and noisy, because you're already going to set it up with an exact gap, and then it's going to heat up, and it's really going to be clanging, clang, 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 clang. Radial engines, all the ones I worked on, solid. They did have the roller tappet, but they're solid. And you're supposed to adjust them every so many hours. And I don't remember how many. I think the 0235 is every 100 hours. Which would make
a solid roller.
Huh?
Solid roller tappet, you said?
It's got a roller tappet without a hydraulic unit on the inside.
Oh.
So you have to adjust it. So there's a big adjustment nut on the end of the rocker arm. So you have to adjust it. Wouldn't be my favorite thing to have in an engine. As opposed to that, all the other ones, they have hydraulic units, kind of like our cars. So what happens is when you build the engine, you have these hydraulic units, and you can see there's a little spring right there. And this is a hydraulic unit that goes down in there. And I know I got a better picture over here. One more. There we go. So what we're looking at, here's the cam. Here's the hydraulic tappet body. And then inside of it, you have that hydraulic unit. Right here, there's a cup. Little piece right there. It's a little cup. And then this is the 2-piece hydraulic unit. I'll say it again, but the 2-piece hydraulic unit, these 2 pieces are a matched machine set. You never mix them up. They come out of the factory matched. They were match flowed. They made sure they work. So all it really is this piston that goes in a cylinder with a ball and a spring down in here. And what happens, in a nutshell, is there's a hole in this annulus. It's an annulus where it's kind of grooved out right there. So the oil pressure is going to come in here. It's going to fill up this high oil pressure, then works its way up here into here, fills up this, and forces the piston out until the push rod comes up and pushes in here and makes the rocker arm move down and touch the valve. Doesn't open it, but it takes up all the slop. So what is the, I think it's one of your Q&A questions. What is the valve clearance on this type of engine?
0.
And it's 0. All right, but when you build the engine, it's not 0. It's some number. It's a lot. It's 110 to 30, if I remember correctly, for Continental. So 0.110 to .030. It's a huge range. And so you got to set it up. Well, what I see in the field all the time, people pull off cylinders, and then it's hydraulic unit, so I don't have to set the valve clearance. Somebody else did it when the engine was built. And you've ground valves, you've changed where there are in there, you've maybe swapped the rocker arms or done something with them. You got all kinds of machining went on there, and they're like, check it, They just throw it back on there. Well, these things, they stay pumped up. The oil gets in there and it gets a little cold, and you can't really bleed them down from the outside. And so they just kind of shove it together. I'm like, this should work. And I would say that I see that more often than not. People just like, it's not that hard to deal with this. You pull these out. And by the way, all of the manuals say never, ever, ever use a magnet to pull these out, because they're down inside the tap ends. You got to get them out. And so how do you get something? I watched you guys. Every time you had to get something out of a hole, you just grabbed a magnet and popped it out. Right? All the manuals say never use a magnet on these, because you'll magnetize them and it causes the little ball down in here to not work very well. So then they won't work. Use a piece of safety wire, just a little hook, and you pop them out. It's real easy. And I have a procedure that I always used. I just laid a little towel out, and then I filled it full of, I like WD-40 or LPS1. It's super lightweight, so I'd fill them with WD-40. I would squeeze them together and use a piece of brass, because I don't want anything magnetic, and I would pop the little ball and just squirt it out and squirt all the oil out and just get them so it's just WD-40. And then you get it so you can actually plunger them by hand, and then you put it all together, and then you'll see when Larry's going to have you do one on the O200s when you guys do this. And just remember that you got to set it. And so what happens if you get it all together, and then you got your cylinder, then you push down on the rocker arm, and then you measure here between the foot and the valve, and you're measuring the clearance, and you have way too much clearance. What are you going to do now? There's no adjustment. You can see right there. Where's your adjustment?
Take it apart and do it again.
What are you going to do again? You have too much clearance. Will you add washers down here or something?
Yeah.
Sand?
More
Oil.
fluid?
Yeah.
More fluid?
What if it's what if you don't have enough clearance?
More fluid?
More fluid. Yeah, push rods come in different lengths.
Oh.
Yeah.
Smart.
Yeah, push rods. They come shorter, they come longer. If they come longer, it's gonna
Push it up.
push up and
Push it in.
less clearance. Shorter. So yeah. Change out your push rods. All right, where are we at here? Okay, hydraulic unit, 0 lash. Okay, we're right out there. Oil under pressure. Under pressure, inflates the lifter. I gotta go up. Inflates the lifter through the oil gallery. That's where they hang pictures of oil. Through the through hole and tappet body. Through a hole in the tappet body. Tappet body past the ball. A little tiny ball. Check valve. And inflates the hydraulic unit. Hydraulic unit to the point.
Oh, this is a big one. Oh, man.
Where let me see. I'll just say rocker arm touches the valve. I actually wrote more here. Cylinder inflates to the point where the plunger pushes on the push rod socket and the push rod until there is no clearance. I have way too much here.
Yeah.
Well, don't write it.
Well, what am I supposed to write?
Put a little smiley face. Just put, just wrote,
What am I supposed to do?
forgot to listen.
Happy face with the asterisk.
So this is what inside. This is what I wrote. I wrote that. So
Reference tab.
reference given, yeah. Oil under pressure inflates the lifter through the oil gallery. So this would be the oil gallery up through here, through the little hole in the tappet right there. So it's going to come up through here and fill up this chamber, go through here, fill up, and the pressure will push the ball off its seat, allow the oil past the seat into here, which pushes this piston out, which pushes this socket, because there's three pieces, there's no picture, against the push rod, and the push rod goes out. Okay, and then and that inflates it. As the cam comes around, it is, as the cam pushes on the tappet, the spring takes the initial impact right there, starts to go boom, impact. So the little spring right there. The force of the cam pushing the tappet open causes higher pressure in the plunger, which is right here, the plunger, and forces the ball on its seat. So now this becomes a higher pressure, pushes the ball back, boom, it's on its seat. That stays inflated as this comes around. Otherwise, it would just deflate, and then that wouldn't work. So it does that. The leak down past here, it leaks down and comes right through this little passage, fills up the cup, and this is oil will leak and drip on the valve, oiling it. So it's all designed to do all of that.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, someone's got some big brains behind that.
Just drawing that picture. Big brains.
Ah.
Yeah.
So, all right. How do let's see, I'm going to do this and try and make it not complicated. I think that kind of says what we need to say. What else do I have? We'll say leak down of hydraulic hydraulic unit. Leak down of hydraulic unit allows oil to travel down push rod to oil valves, rocker arms and valves and rocker arms. Rocker arms, there we go. Let's see. Put this, the two-piece hydraulic unit is a match set. Do not swap them around. And we'll say lifters must be bled down to check dry tappet clearance. So I met a lot of mechanics who will they'll pull the cylinder off, put it back on, then go to check that dry tappet clearance and go, I forgot to pull out the tappets and I never bled them down. So I know what I'll do. It's getting near the end of the day. I will just put it so that the cam is all the way on the lobe, pushing the valve open. And by the time I come in the morning, the valve should have bled back down. That's never worked yet. So I know of only one way on this style that I just showed you to bleed them down. That's take them apart. Now on the Continental ones, yeah, it's the same thing. They're just a little bit different on how you bleed them because you don't take them apart. You just use a pin in the back, something that doesn't brass, it's not magnetic, and just bleed them down. It's all the same concept. So push rod socket, lifters. Never, oh, that's a big one. Never use a magnet. Never use a magnet on hydraulic units. If you magnetize the ball and it's stitched in the wrong spot, then it's not going to work. I have on build-up, dry tappet clearance is checked. Clearance is adjusted with shorter, longer push rods. I should write that for you, huh? It is adjusted with longer or shorter push rods. Push rods. Oh, here's some notes I have on the high flow versus low flow. High flow lifters cause the duration of the valve to be less at idle. On intake side, this smooths out the idle. On exhaust side, it allows more oil to flow to the valve. Yeah, that's what I said. I think TCM uses low flow on intake side to slow low flow. Yeah, I said that already, so I think that's just kind of gee whiz information. What else? I think I'm going to leave it at that. Hopefully I covered what I need to cover. Solid lifters. Solid lifters. That's what you have. Must be periodically adjusted. By the way, that cold adjustment and hot adjustment, those are two different numbers. Follow instructions. Again, people don't because it's so simple. You're like, well, I know, adjust valves. Think about it. What are you going to do? Take off the rocker box covers, adjust the little screw in the lock nut until you get the right thing, right? Yeah. But the service instructions actually have you do a preload. So if you go into the instructions, it'll tell you to actually over tighten a certain side before you do the other side. And like, what? Because they want one side, a set of springs pushing really hard on the cam to push it all the way to one side, so you start adjusting it. So you got to follow instructions. One side is preloaded. That'll make sense when you do it. It's just like most things you're doing. And I kind of warned you, I think, at the beginning of the class. I did. Remember telling you about, it's funny because engines, they just look so simple, right? It's like there's nothing to it. You sure we're going to need a book? I mean, come on, you just take it apart. All I really need to know is the torque. It's just obvious, right? But the more you get into it, are you guys starting to see all of the little tiny nuances? You're like, how would I know that? It's just that was one little sentence hidden somewhere in a chapter that's not even what I'm working with. You guys are, hopefully you guys are seeing that and you're going, geez, So yeah, that's what I told you. I see a lot of people out there, it's like, wow, how hard could it be? What could possibly go wrong? Quite a bit. So what happens if you have the wrong clearance? So insufficient clearance will cause valves to stay open. Well, if it stays open, then it's not getting on the seat, and it's not going to run very well, and the valve's going to overheat because it needed the seat to cool down, so that's going to be bad. If you have excessive clearance, insufficient clearance, let's go. What about excessive? Let's say it'll open still, but it's excessive. The valve is going to open early or late? Going to open late. Takes more ramp to get it going. So it's going to open late and close early. Like a bad restaurant. And of course that would change valve overlap if there was such a thing. Okay, push rod. Oh, probably saying too much. Obviously, it transmits the action of the rocker arm. I'm going to skip that because it's obvious. Carries oil to rocker assembly. I want to see your push rods are solid. You don't have holes drilled to them. So on all the other ones, part of a check for overhaul or repair, always take and I lay them on a flat plate, like those steel plates that we had where you guys used for checking the run out, and I run them across there and make sure they don't wobble, and then you make sure the ends are swedged on tight, and then you hold them up and you look at them through light and look and check the inside of them, make sure that they're all open and clear. Other than that, there's not much you have to do to it. Let's see. Oh, but you have the solid ones. So how do we get the top end lubricated?
Just dribbles down.
It does. It just dribbles on the outside of them. Yep.
The shroud.
Yeah, down the shroud too. Let's see. Push rod carries all the rocker assembly. Yeah, and then multiple links. Multiple links to adjust hydraulic system. You don't have multiple links. You just have a screw on the back. All right. I need to move over. I move over? Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Oops.
Yeah, just put a Y on adjust there. Right now.
Rocker arms. Well, I already talked a lot about rocker arms. Let me see. What do I? Yeah, I covered all this already. Transmits the action of the valve, mounted on a steel shaft, may be drilled to allow oil to drip on valve tip. I will say that they're often, I'll do this, often exclusive to intake or exhaust. Yours are not. They're like interchangeable, but that's not very common. Most of the time it's like, that's an exhaust one. They are very different. Absolutely different. Well, like if you tried to build a big bore Continental, because they're angle valves. So, geez, I can't believe I missed this. This is called a parallel head valve because they're parallel, but a lot of engines out there, they're not. They're angle head. And so the valves are actually going like this instead of parallel. And so all of the really good engines are angle head.
Why is that? What makes them better?
Well, from a mechanic standpoint, I will tell you that like there's the Lycoming 0360, which was a parallel valve, and then they made the Lycoming IO360, which is an angle head. And those, you get an 0360 parallel head in, and there's always like a 50-50 shot as it cracked. But the angle head Lycomings, oh my God, those things are bulletproof. I just never saw them crack. They were just run. They were just, I don't know what Lycoming did to those things, but man, yeah. Of all, people always, what's your favorite engine? Well, if I really had to pick one and say, that's the engine I want, it's any Lycoming 6-cylinder with those angle heads. It's like, damn, those things are great. The only thing I didn't like is they used, I didn't like the intake seats. They were just really hard to work with because they were a Venturi seat and it was problematic. But let's see. So we got all that. Often exclusives, yeah. Well, but on a what I was going to say is on a like a Continental, you can't angle head. Usually you can't put them on the wrong cylinder. They're aimed one certain way, and you put them the other way, and it's like, well, that just misses the whole valve. So it doesn't work with a dang. Valve clearances. Let me see.
Are the heads of the rocker arms are those hardened, right?
The what?
The faces of the
Yes,
rocker
the feet are nitrided. We covered that the other day, and I was talking about the whole story about grinding them.
arms?
And
That's right,
yeah, because then you have to check the hardness when you grind them and all that. Valve clearances, I've really kind of talked quite a bit about valve clearance already. I know what time it is, I can see that. Let's see. What do I want to say? Due to expansion, a cold engine needs valve clearance. Valve clearance is more when the engine is hot, but valves are set cold.
Yeah, he's kind of an ass.
Measured between valve tip and rocker arm face. And rocker arm. Yeah, we talked about that. It's just different Depends on if it's hydraulic or not. We talked about excessive clearance. Valve opens late, closes early, too small. Valve opens early and closes late. Misadjusted valves. Yeah. Wow, look at that. Covered all that kind of stuff. All right, break time.
The terms lifters and